Welcome everyone to How Business Owners Can Use Content Marketing to Grow Their Business. I'm your host, Brandon Chapman, the principal of SAS Wealth Insurance. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Today's session will be recorded. So if your most important client calls you, don't worry, you'll have the recording sent to you tomorrow. If you have questions throughout the session, you can post them in the chat or ask through the Q&A function available through Zoom webinar. Feedback is appreciated. So if you have ideas for future webinars, or just want to let us know what you think, we're always looking for ways to improve. The purpose of this webinar series is to educate business owners on different strategies to grow their business. And we've brought in some pretty heavy hitters to talk about various aspects of how they can evaluate growing their business. So if you're interested in any of the other topics in the series, please visit this link. As well, we will send you this link following the session today. This is our last webinar in this particular series, but we will likely do more in the new year. So once again, please do feel free to let us know your thoughts. So today, I'm quite pleased to welcome William Johnson and David Dyck as our guests. William is the founder and managing director of the Vancouver Tech Journal. I've known William for several years, since his time at Innovate BC, and I was always very impressed with his ability to turn his journalistic experience into building a business. And that's really evolved into the Vancouver Tech Journal and the Vancouver tech scene. So welcome, William. We're really happy to have you here today.
Hello.
Next up, we've got David Dyck, who's the co-founder and VP of Marketing and PR for Apollo Insurance. Apollo is digitizing the insurance buying process, empowering brokers to offer a more customer-centric buying experience. I've actually known David since the undergraduate days at Simon Fraser University, and he was actually leading the student newspaper at the time, I believe. He's always been creative in his approach to content production, and alongside his co-founder, Jeff McCann, they've been very successful community builders even before Apollo. Welcome, David.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. Excited to be here.
So both are leaders in the content marketing space. And so today I hope you'll get some value from hearing a bit about their stories, and as well as some tips and tricks with regards to content marketing. With regards to our agenda today, David's going to start us off with sharing a bit of the history of Apollo and some of what's worked for them in building Apollo Insurance. Then William will share some of his story with regards to the Vancouver Tech Journal, and we'll have an open Q&A forum at the end. So if you do have questions throughout, you can pop them in and we'll get to them when we can. But we're very lucky that they've been able to carve out some time for us today. So let's start off with David from Apollo. So first of all, welcome, David.
Thanks, Brandon. Great to be here.
So I've known about you and some of your work for many years, but maybe talk a little bit about your work pre-Apollo and how that kind of brought you to the Apollo journey.
Yeah, for sure. You let slip a little spoiler there with the Peak at SFU. Shout out to the Peak up in Maggie Benson Center there, where I really started my content career running that newspaper. We had about 12 editors and then a bunch of sort of freelance content creators. And that really was where I cut my teeth with content, and then leverage that into a career in journalism. So I'm sure William will have some interesting things to say about that as well. But that's where I really learned sort of narrative craft and then that digital aspect, right, of following the story based on what's getting attention, and then following up and tracking that audience, right? So audience curation. And really developing and honing and curating that audience. So from there, I went into insurance again in the content game. Worked for a large brokerage group here in Vancouver, running their content strategy. We launched several sort of initiatives on small business. Drone insurance was really big back then. We had a drone insurance line. And so that education component was super important in terms of, what are the various sort of lines of coverage you need? But beyond just the insurance aspect of educating and informing that buyer on everything they need with relation to their business, right? What are some of the Transport Canada regulations? We got a ton of attention. Just producing very helpful, genuine, authentic content on regulatory restrictions beyond just insurance. And so from there, Jeff McCann, my co-founder, and I started Apollo and really took all of that learning into the business. And we, right from the start, had a very strong content focus. We knew that educating the broker community, which was our buyer when we initially started, on the importance of digital, social media, digital marketing, all of that was huge for us. And that really enabled us to grow an audience base as well as a user base, right? So transacting insurance is obviously our business, but educating that buyer on why digital is better, giving them that sort of authentic value add content that helps them with their business, much like what this webinar is meant to do, right? It's very similar. But if you can do that, and if you really define that audience properly and figure out what their pain points are and address them in a very altruistic way, you'll create a buyer that is extremely loyal to your brand and that trusts you. And so that has enabled us to really go out and build a strong user base. We developed early on Apollo Magazine, which is a strong sort of content hub for us. Beyond just the SEO play, it's just helpful advice and really value add sort of content for that user. So that's sort of the story of Apollo. Obviously, our core business is transacting insurance online, but content is a huge part of that.
It's very interesting because the insurance and financial world typically is quite poor at content marketing and in terms of connecting with their audience through digital means. It's one of the, I would say, later industries to perhaps adopt innovation and content marketing. So how did you guys find pushing content out to an industry that generally didn't care about content?
Yeah, as you're of course well aware, it's not something that's common in the industry, but that provides an opportunity, right? Building that audience, like we do our own sort of webinar series where we instruct and inform and educate brokers on our products, right? And to be able to offer that, especially, I would say, especially during COVID, when everyone's sitting at home, and they aren't getting that sort of office face-to-face interaction. There's not that osmosis that happens where you can just pop into the office next door, the cubicle next door to your coworker and just ask a question about coverage lines. Or we're not doing office visits ourselves as an organization to educate that user base. To be able to put that in front of them, again, it's about what is the demand in the market for informationally, and how do we pair that with what we're offering as a product. But you've got to start with that end consumer. What's their friction point? What's their pain point? And that's really how you're going to find value, I think, is really getting to know that user as well as you can.
That's really interesting because I'd say most businesses don't start with a content strategy first. They tend to build that later, but you did it simultaneously as you built your product. And I think that's actually pretty interesting because did you manage to get feedback from brokers early on that you perhaps wouldn't have gotten otherwise?
Yeah, definitely. It's about a feedback loop, right? So sales and marketing work hand in hand. If I'm hearing something on our sales team that's a friction point, how are we going to address that using content in a scalable way, right? Answering the question 50 times is not scalable, but producing a piece of content that answers that question and takes your own organization's approach to answering that question, that's a very scalable way to help the community and to grow your business, right?
So I guess a question I have for you then is, which platforms do you use, and has that evolved over time from when you started to now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We've always used HubSpot. I used it as a content curator and creator at the brokerage group we were at. But that has been an extremely efficient and effective way for us to scale our content creation, because there's, social media automation, email automation, all of those tools work really, really hand in hand with all of the work that you're doing on content. If you're just developing content and throwing it up into the void, that's not really going to help you. You need to have that. You need to develop and really hone that audience. And one thing that's really important is, rather than focusing on how are you going to grow your audience, how are you going to serve your existing audience? That's how we've always thought about it. If you can serve that core group, it's going to grow on its own. But if you lose focus of that and think, okay, now we gotta answer this question, but you haven't validated if that's an important question to your audience, then you're not going to get very far, or you're going to waste time. So it's, as far as platforms go, HubSpot has been extremely useful for us. And then in terms of social media, for us as a business, our buyers were just all on LinkedIn. And so rather than going, TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, all of them, and sort of spending all that energy addressing each of those platforms, we just chose one effectively and said, we're just going to go this one. This is where our users are. Again, it comes back to where do they live? What are they interested in? But where are they, right? You have to go to where they are. You can't sort of change their habits and move them to a different platform. So LinkedIn for us has been extremely useful in brand dissemination. But again, our content gets great engagement on there. And if we see it doing well, let's do more of that. If it doesn't do well, we can stop.
Yeah, and I really love that, because you empower brokers to not only transact online, but because they see you putting out good quality content, that probably encourages them to do something similar. So you actually end up being a bit of a
thought leadership. Yeah, that's an important aspect, right? Where if you can elevate your brand and create that trust, that empowers the rest of the community to start doing that too. And we've seen that adoption happen too, with a lot of our broker partners, right? Like they see and they emulate, and then it's just better for the entire community. It's great.
For sure. Yeah, you end up galvanizing the whole industry by being a leader on the tech side, but you're actually empowering the brokers to do the same, which I really appreciate. So is there any metrics that you can share about perhaps what type of content has done best? Because there's obviously, educational, and then there's empowering, and there's personal stories. What have you found works best, and how do you pick and choose what to share when?
For sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, again, I'm going to keep coming back to know your audience, right? And so obviously sort of blog style content has been really good for us, but video has been extremely good for us as well. But you got to kind of pick your moments, right? When it comes to, it has to come back to what's the message and who's the audience. So a video on a product launch is great, because we know that LinkedIn will already sort of boost that type of content naturally, but it takes resources to create video, right? So you have to pick. So what's the most valuable piece of content, and what's the most valuable medium to use to push that out? Really depends. So I'll take product launch as a good example. I think we've launched like 9 products this year. That aspect of our business is big, because as soon as we launch a new product, we can access a whole new sort of segment of the market. So a quick 2-minute, maybe a minute long educational video about the product that's arresting, that gets the attention immediately, and informs about the basics of that to that buyer. We've found that works extremely well. And then once they're engaged, you can give more in-depth sort of written content. You can give sort of an FAQ style thing, but getting them into that funnel, we found in that particular instance, video is great. But again, what we always do is we go back and we look at our metrics, what's getting that engagement. Let's do more of that. realistically, like we can't just put out videos, but it's also what's the sort of mix of content that you're doing. Not everything is going to be puppies, right? Like puppies get great engagement no matter what platform, I would say. But if you're just constantly putting puppies out there, no one's going to understand what you do as a business. So it's about that mix and that balance and creating sort of an engaging environment for people to interact with your brand on.
I haven't done a puppy post yet. I'm going to get on that right after this, but
You got to do it.
It's some good info. So what are some of your favorite content pieces that Apollo's put out since the business started? And then why was it your favorite?
Yeah, great question. So some of the most interesting things we've done, I think, are webinars like this one. It's a very interactive thing where people can actually engage with you as a brand. They can engage with the actual content. They can answer questions in real time, as we'll do later on. This has just been an extremely useful tool for us from an engagement perspective and an education perspective. We did one on LinkedIn a couple of months ago that just, it really blew the doors off just because people were curious about it, right? And obviously we're so prolific on LinkedIn already that was just a natural topic. So that was a really fun session to do. There was also, I mean, I'm a journalist at heart, and so I had the opportunity early on to meet with a senior sort of insurance executive who works for a large reinsurance company here in Canada. And he walked me through this amazing story of several years ago going to Indonesia and starting a test microinsurance product and launching it into an extremely underserved commercial market there, where you would literally buy insurance on a card and they would watch the river levels. And if the river levels went up a certain amount, that basically shut down a series of sort of communities along that river, and they could cash in that insurance like a debit card. So your moped business didn't go out of business, or your grocery store didn't go out of business because no one was buying. So this was just a fascinating story about the actual value, the core value that proposition that insurance has, and really using it in a really interesting case study. And I was able to leverage that and create a long form piece of content that went onto our blog. And it was immensely popular just because of how fascinating the subject matter was. But I'm always gonna bend towards the sort of journalistic aspect. But that was a really fun piece to do.
I know we've got content marketers and business owners on the webinar here from across Canada. So I know we've got the unfortunate flooding going on across BC right now, and so that's obviously going to have some negative impact to probably the commercial property and casualty world. How do current events play into content, and what's an effective way to approach that? And have you guys at Apollo done that much in the past, or do you plan to do it going forward?
Yeah, things like that are interesting. I mean, we're very careful not to sort of be too reactive. I think that a lot of the focus for us from a content perspective is sort of evergreen content. From a PR perspective, I think there are often really interesting opportunities to respond. The flooding is a great example of, that's a time when you're going to need insurance for our business. This is something where we've had to sort of on the fly develop content to disseminate to many of our customers, but we've kept that sort of one-to-one. We haven't really, on that particular issue at least, come out. But certainly current events as it relates to your business will often sort of comment or spin up a press release on our take on something happening in the industry. Especially for our business that's very B2B focused. We do a lot of content around trends that we see in the industry, especially with COVID. We've done a lot of stuff on, what's a new market, what's an emerging market as a result of COVID. Pet adoption is huge right now, right? So how is that going to affect the market? More people than ever are renting rather than buying, or people are upsizing their house. So how are we addressing that as an industry? there's a lot of great opportunity to show that thought leadership when it comes to responding to current events, for sure. But I think the key is to sort of pick your moments and make it relevant to what your business, the problems that your business solves.
Makes sense. We could tie in the quality puppy content with the current events of people adopting more puppies than usual. One more question for you, and then we'll switch gears with William. How has Apollo's content strategy changed now that you have a larger team and perhaps a larger client base?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do, I would say, with more sophisticated content that's targeted to specific users or actions, right? So taking a closer look at that entire sort of funnel from top to bottom and saying, you know, if you're at the top of the funnel and you're looking to purchase insurance for yourself, you probably want some basic information on what coverages should I have. But as you move down, you might want more education. You might want to dive into each of those coverage lines. And so having more sophisticated content that actually answers those questions and removes that friction from the buying process, that's really key. And so again, HubSpot is a great tool for this, where you can tell where on the buyer's journey that person is, and you can actually address that with specific content, leverage email marketing to ping them with, you know, hey, here's a helpful resource. If you're interested, here's more information to sort of guide them through that process. That's really sort of the next evolution for us.
Yeah, HubSpot's a behemoth, so I imagine you're just like, it's like an onion, and you're just getting deeper and deeper into that platform and leveraging more of the tools available as you got more people using your product and consuming your content.
For sure, but at the end of the day, the proposition doesn't change with content. I would say it's still get to know that buyer, provide the content that they're looking for, but it really starts with understanding your customer. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you so much, David. Let's switch gears a bit here and have William come on and share a bit about the Vancouver Tech Journal. William.
Boom. There we go.
Beautiful. So William, thanks again for joining us today. First question for you. Pre-Vancouver Tech Journal, can you share a bit about your background and sort of what got you here today?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, Brandon. David, fantastic. Good to hear your story. And again, I followed you guys, obviously, because you're an insurtech company and we cover tech. I'm originally from Ottawa, Ontario, and I worked in communications and PR for like a decade. And believe it or not, I think a lot of you guys probably know the story of Shopify, your small business owners. And, you know, the folks at Shopify, they used to meet up in a Bridgehead coffee shop in Ottawa. And I used to actually also meet up in that Bridgehead coffee shop, but I was clearly getting coffee with the wrong guys. I should have been getting coffee with the Shopify folks. But I've worked in coffee for over 10 years. I've done a lot of writing. And whenever I was doing writing and blogging in the city of Ottawa, just the most exciting things were happening in tech and innovation. So that's how I sort of got into that space. Fast forward, I moved to Vancouver in 2015. Actually was doing some writing for BetaKit, which is a national tech publication, I'm sure many of you know. And then I was working for Innovate BC, which is a crown agency of the provincial government. And what really led me to starting the Vancouver Tech Journal was the fact that for meetings with, you know, politicians or ministers or senior people in government, I'd have to know what was going on in the tech ecosystem. And I always just wish that there was a resource that existed that sort of covered everything specific to Vancouver and, you know, Greater Vancouver and, you know, the rest of BC. And I thought, well, this is something I would want. I'm just going to make it for myself, basically. And so in the early days, it's, you know, it's sent to myself sort of like as a record of the week. And I also sent it to about, you know, 5 to 6 people, you know, early on every 2 weeks. And the Vancouver Tech Journal, for those of you who know it, is grown a long way. And, you know, Brad, I'm sure we'll get into that, but that's sort of I was a writer and a comms person, got into technology, wanted to know what was happening in Vancouver tech. So I made the resource for myself.
Those are oftentimes the best way problems are solved, is addressing a problem that you have in your own industry. So well done. Yeah. And I guess we're lucky that you came to Vancouver, because being a journalist in Ottawa, there's obviously a lot to write about there. So fortunately, you're here and you've created the Vancouver Tech Journal and you've been contributing to the scene here. So I guess let's talk a little bit about the type of content that's going out on the Vancouver Tech Journal. So I follow a few of your channels, but which channels did you choose to, or mediums did you choose to facilitate communication? And then has that evolved over time based on your readership?
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't evolved. I'd say it's expanded, but I mean, with the Vancouver Tech Journal, with some of our like the other brands that work within our organization, which is Overstory Media Group, we use newsletters first and foremost as the way that we communicate with our audiences and our communities. And there's a specific reason, which is that's basically, I think, the most intimate relationship you can have with your customers or your audience, right? There is, I guess there's Gmail in between you and the customer or the audience member, rather than relying on, the algorithm of Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn to get in touch with those people. Of course, we use all those other channels, but we build audiences and brands from email newsletters, and we're super intentional about that. So we use a tool called Substack. And to be honest, I wouldn't recommend it necessarily for a small business owner. There are a lot more powerful tools. David talked about, HubSpot, obviously, MailChimp, those are really useful tools, but we use Substack. And the reason we use Substack, just if people are curious, is because Substack really easily produces blog posts that are also emails. And you can also flip on paywalls if you need to do that. So that's why we use that tool, Substack, subscription stack. However, for people who know me, they know that I live basically on Twitter, personally, and then also the brand, the Vancouver Tech Journal. And we also find that's where a lot of our audience is, but also that's where we learn a lot of information that we then repackage and then we send it to our audience. That's why that's a key channel. And another channel that's really key to us that we see a lot of engagement similar to David is LinkedIn, because that's where the business folks are hanging out. And for anyone who knows tech, it is a sector that has a fierce battle on for talent. So obviously LinkedIn, again, is another platform that's super useful to us, but then also super useful for our audience. And Brandon, we might get into this, but Vancouver Tech Journal is interesting, right? In that our readers actually aren't the customer right now. Our customers are our partners, or our sponsors, right? So we might get into that a bit later about like how we think about that, but it is, I guess, a distinction that needs to be made.
It's very insightful, William, the thought that the newsletter or the email is actually the most intimate way to connect with your audience, and that you're in their inbox and they're opening it on one-to-one and you're not relying on the algorithm. Because I see many businesses that perhaps just don't do newsletter and they focus on social. But you're right, you are at the whim of the social media Goliath and the algorithms. And I think LinkedIn's pretty good for organic reach, but like that could change tomorrow.
Well, and that's exactly the thing, right? I mean, I remember early days with Facebook when people spent all this money investing and building their audiences on Facebook. And then it turned out that wasn't really your audience, and companies had to pay to reach the people who liked their pages anyway, right? And I think that was a shock to everyone. And then the other thing is that, I mean, we could talk more about, I'm sure everyone's heard about Apple's ad tracking transparency initiative that came out with their last iOS update, where they have removed the ability, well, they haven't removed the ability, they've allowed users like with an iPhone to say whether or not they want apps to track them from app to app. Most people, or like 90% of people, have said, no, you can't track me, which is obviously impacted the ability for small businesses to, advertise, as effectively, right, on Facebook and LinkedIn. And, the market cap of Snapchat has been reflected in that by dropping, $30 billion, right? So it's really interesting.
Well, yeah, and I think that privacy and solicited communications versus unsolicited communications is when we're getting bombarded on our devices day by day. Fortunately, you and David both put out quality content, and so I think people that see it are happy to read it and consume it. But not all the marketers in the world are, and they're trying to just get eyeballs on it. But you want to get the right eyeballs at the right time. That's really interesting. So I have a question. How do you write so much? Because there's a ton of content that goes out. I know you must have a team behind the scenes, but you probably didn't to start. So how do you manage your time when you're producing so much content?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And things have changed on that front, right? So at the beginning, it was just me. And really at the beginning, and David talked a lot about this, like figure out who your audience is, and then, basically providing value to them, right? So at the very beginning, it was just me writing this newsletter, and it was just me curating and rounding up all like the most important technology news, and just basically, a little write up and then a link and sending people somewhere else to read what the news was. As the Vancouver Tech Journal team has grown, we've actually ended up being like one of the top sources for the actual news. So there's less curating and sending people somewhere else, and it's more we're actually the ones that have the information. And like you said, Brandon, we do produce a lot, probably, I don't know, 10 to 15 articles a week, which again, we do in-house. But then if you actually read one of our Sunday briefings, like the last one had 47 stories in it, which is absurd. And it's really impressive that there's that much going on in the Vancouver tech scene. But okay, to answer your question, I've got different systems for what articles I do write and which ones I don't write. And the other thing to know is that like, I'm working on like 15 stories at a time. So it might look like we're producing like a lot, like in a day, where it's like, it's something I've been working on for like 2 months. And we're trickling them out to make sure that we're providing, just the right amount of content, each day of the week. Because that's the other thing, like people can only consume so much, right? Like we want people to have a healthy media diet. And I hope people aren't reading 15 stories a day or anything like that, because that's crazy. But again, we have systems for the types of stories we do. We're working on stories like over months sometimes, and then sometimes there are breaking stories. Like this month, Clue, a competitive intelligence company, raised $79 million. So I literally read that in my bed and then had to work on a story before running to the gym, before coming back to this. But then also, you mentioned we have a bigger team now. So it originally started as being me. We have a guy named James Matthews. He's a staff writer. We have a guy named Paul Welch. He does long form pieces for us. He just did an incredible piece on Lori Schultz. She was the BC Tech Person of the Year. I encourage you to go read that story. We just added Isabel Kirkwood. She's another fantastic writer. She just wrote a great story on Red Brick. It's a Victoria company doing $80 million a year in revenue. And then there's also Aaron G, another great female reporter. Just wrote a piece on a company called Padia, which is a gaming company. And there's a few other folks. So we have a larger team, which is very exciting. And we've also added in the last year an account executive and a community manager. Obviously, not all small businesses have resources to build a team like that. So I encourage you to use tools like Hootsuite and some of their acquisitions and Unbounce. Unbounce does landing pages, yes, but they also have an AI product that helps you write headlines and write copy if you're a small business owner. So, I've answered a few things there. We have a bigger team. We've got great processes, but then for small businesses that don't have those resources, there are cool tools out there that can help you be 6 people in one. So I encourage you to check those out.
Thanks. Yeah, I've written a couple of those down. I've got some work to do after this. But so question for you, Will. So how do you decide who to feature in your, say your Sunday briefings or in any of your content?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's what I get asked a lot. At VTJ, we've got like a mission for what we're trying to do, and then we also have I think David sort of spoke to this. There's content that we've put out, and it's performed really well. We thought, oh, okay, like let's just do more of that, right? That's what the audience wants. Give the people what they want. So first and foremost, it's exceptional stories of really cool people building technology companies, or really any businesses that are tech enabled or leveraging tech for innovation within BC. So that's first and foremost. And like, if you go to my Twitter or my LinkedIn, like my email's there. Anyone watching this, like, reach out to me. Send me an interesting story. But first and foremost, yeah, is it an interesting story? So hit me up after this. Brandon, you can share my email. The other thing is there are things that happen that even if we don't want to write about it, we know that the community or the tech industry at large is going to be very interested in it. So we need to write about it. And to be honest, funding rounds fall into that category of story that like literally happens every week in BC, right? Especially this past year. There's not a week that goes by where some company doesn't raise 10 to $100 million. So it's not that interesting, really. It happens all the time, but we know that it's a story that the audience expects of us, and that anytime we post it anywhere, it gets really insane engagement. So those stories are actually a very key tactic in our our organic engagement on our social platforms. So even if they're not the most interesting to write, X company got $80 million from Tiger Global and Salesforce Ventures. So the audience wants, and we know it's going to perform exceptionally well on Twitter and LinkedIn, right? Which is going to lead to our long-term growth and increase in our followers on those platforms. So we publish those.
Yeah, get the people what they want. Makes sense. So now with regards to perhaps smaller business owners that are looking to get featured in either VTJ or another publication platform, what advice would you have for them when they are seeking that type of profiling?
You guys talked a little bit earlier. Well, there's two things. There's, first of all, like, think about what the story is. Like, I cannot stress that enough. People will send us an email with information about their company, and it's like, okay, well, what is the story and the narrative here? Like, why would someone take like pleasure in reading about this company or about this product? So people just really have to ask themselves why 5 times? Like, who cares? But who cares? But who cares? You know, times 10 actually, right? That's one key thing. You and David talked a little bit about current events. Like, if you have something that's really timely, like, that's obviously can be used as a really good news hook. So if you can tie something together, I think that's really important, and put that in front of us. I think that's really interesting. The other really big thing about the Vancouver Tech Journal, and I think with all news in general, and I think David might agree with this, like, what is the human element? Like, how does this really relate back to people, you know, and humanity as a whole, right? So there's all these tech companies doing all this cool innovation in BC. But you got to ask, like, but really, like, why does your business or what you're doing in the community, why does it really matter to people here in this community at the end of the day? No matter what fancy quantum, blockchain, Bitcoin thing you're doing, or whatever, like, what does it really mean for people and like art and, you know, like in society? I think people got to really think about that. However, there are some small businesses on here, right? And you might have like a bakery business that is using Shopify or using Thinkific to sell their baking courses or their recipes. Like, that's really cool. You know, maybe you doubled your revenue over the last year when COVID shut down stores by launching an online store. Like, that's really interesting. Like, how did you pull it off, right? There's probably other people like you. Share that story, right? So really, it's like, what's the story? What's the narrative? You know, tied to current events, and like get to like the heart of the matter and how it impacts like people.
I love that. And at the end of the day, if it's not interesting to the person that's sending the message and they haven't checked with a few of their friends before they approach a publication, then yeah, there's a high chance that it's not something that's worth publishing. That makes a ton of sense. William, I'll just invite David back on, and
yeah,
I'll queue up. I have a few queued up questions, but for those who are joining us today, if you have questions based on today, please feel free to type them into the chat or through the Q&A function. Now, first off, how do you both feel about memes? And maybe David, we'll start with you, and then William, if you have an opinion, you could share as well.
You know, I think some brands leverage memes effectively. I don't think that's sort of on brand for us at Apollo. There was this LinkedIn page that was insurance memes, and it was started by some anonymous person in the insurance industry, and it got a ton of attention. It was really funny. But for ourselves, that's just not really our style, I guess. And I think it would be a little off-putting for our audience if we started manufacturing or distributing memes.
I actually thought that was you that made that page, so now it's good to know that it wasn't you.
I love that page. I wonder what happened to it.
I don't know. And William, what are your thoughts on memes?
Like, so personally, I love memes. Like, love memes. Again, that's half of what I do on Twitter and Instagram. But and to be honest, there are actually some really good business accounts that do really good memes. Like, actually, here's an account or a newsletter all the business owners should subscribe to. It's called The Hustle, right? It's like a global look at business and technology, and they're like really cool writing style, amazing copywriters. And they've got, if you go look for the writers and you follow the writers on Twitter, like, they're all hilarious. I've never seen such clever use of memes to describe what's happening in business. But I mean, I think to get back to like lessons and insights for this group, like it's because their audience loves that, right? Like it really fits with their audience and their brand and their vibe. So that's why it works for them. Like even if I started just posting memes and not writing, people would be like, "What the heck, Will? Like, you know, it's not what you do." And I wouldn't, and I'm not good at it anyway. So that's not what don't do it if you're not good at it, but also like focus on your audience.
Yeah, it's an interesting lesson, right? Like you can only do a finite amount of things. So what are you going to be really, really good at? Decide on that and stick to it. It's easy to get distracted. I'm sure, Will, people come up to you and say, "Hey, why aren't you more like The Hustle? You should do more memes." And you're like, "Well, it's not really what we do." But that's a great example of a shiny object, we call that.
Great, I appreciate that. With my little fintech, we've had more success with highlighting influential people in the industry. One of my content guy really wanted to do a meme, so we did it. It didn't get very good engagement. So I think it comes back to who's our audience. So thanks for that. What happened to Clubhouse? I know I saw, William, you were on Clubhouse a bit. I heard a big hype, and now is it dead? Are people still using it?
I don't know if David has a comment. Go ahead, David.
I don't have a definitive answer. My gut tells me that it was a bit of a byproduct of everyone sitting at home during the pandemic, and it was just this fun new thing that everyone could jump onto. But it really didn't build genuine audiences, and it didn't really, for me, there was never a hook that's like, what's keeping me on this? It was just sort of a flash in the pan. They got a few big sort of Hollywood types, celebrity types, really big names on there for a little while. And then people just got bored and moved on. Not sustainable.
So I actually think Clubhouse it's tricky. So I used Clubhouse a lot when it was a thing. So it's funny. It was like 2-3 months ago. So it's funny to say that. And I used to host weekly meetups where maybe like 30 to 40 people would talk about the tech community in Vancouver. And it was just that could have been sustainable, I think. But then David, you sort of alluded to this, right? Then we can start seeing people again in person. And then I moved it to in real life. So now everyone's like, well, why would I go on this Clubhouse thing? However, there are lots of people who rejected me and say, "Oh, I wish we still had that because I don't want to drive the gas down, Will, and meet in person. Like, I'd love to just do the audio thing." However, I actually think Clubhouse suffered from the pandemic. Like, I think that is what put all the attention on this audio platform that everyone was using. Whereas if there was no pandemic and Clubhouse had like 4 years to sort of continue to build with like the appropriate amount of hype, you know what I mean? Maybe they could have built something sort of long-term and sustainable. But there was just so much attention on it, right? As David said, right? And then every other platform was like, "Oh, okay, we're just going to build a Clubhouse on our platform," right? So now I use Twitter Spaces, which is the Clubhouse copy, but I have a big audience on Twitter, so obviously I'm just going to use that one instead of having to build a new audience somewhere else. And again, I think for this group that's watching today, like it goes back to like you're a small business owner, and you got to decide like, okay, which platform am I going to be on, and where am I going to invest resources? And Clubhouse had a good idea, which was maybe a feature, not a product. And then all the other platforms said, well, we're just going to add that feature. And then small business owners said, well, or people in media generally said, okay, well, we'll just use this feature on the platform that I'm already on and I already know how to use.
It's kind of like Instagram eating Snapchat's lunch.
Exactly.
Yeah, but they've already raised a ton of money, so they're going to keep trying. But certainly makes it difficult. Okay, so I guess that brings me to the other kind of phenomenon platform that's come out recently, TikTok. Are you seeing anyone using it well for business? Do either of you use it for business at all? If not, why?
Yeah, we've sort of tried a little bit of advertising on it, nothing too major, just a test. And it just didn't really come back. I think the best way to leverage it is through an influencer strategy, right? Like if you're a small business owner and you know a few people in the community or in your business that already have that audience and you can tap into that, that could be interesting. But again, if you don't have an influencer strategy, I wouldn't start with TikTok. I would I make that part of your influencer strategy. It's again, like, what do you want to be good at? What channels do you want to go to? Where do you want to put your energy and your time and your resources? And if there's a huge audience base that you can tap into, check it out. It might be right for you. But it really depends on the industry. I feel like it really depends on what you're selling and who you're selling to.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add there. I think the question I always ask about new social media platforms is not necessarily like, should I be actively the person on the platform, but rather, do I need to take this platform seriously? And so, sort of to David's point, the answer for TikTok is yes, but it doesn't mean it has to be you, the one making an account and trying to grow your follower count. There are some, I've seen some good business stuff on TikTok, actually. Like, there's a Canadian news site called The Peak. It's kind of like the Vancouver Tech Journal, but Canada-wide. David, I'm not sure if you've seen their TikTok account. They do really good short, like, news clippy videos, some storytelling in there. And then there is a guy locally in Vancouver who has an account called Digital Samaritan, where he actually, and everyone here should actually go follow that account if you have TikTok, where it's just tips about like design, marketing tools, really, really quick, like Canva. And then, but he'll do a little summary of what like this tool does, and in 30 seconds. And I only know this because he comes to the Vancouver Tech morning coffees, but that count is at 250,000 followers now. And he's getting calls from like Canadian Tire and stuff like that to do partnerships. But that's actually a good example of, again, sort of like a small business person using a tool just to share resources with their audience. But then also, he actually, like, for the people watching today, he would actually have really good tips and tools for you to follow. So I encourage you to check it out. It's called Digital Samaritan.
Thanks for that, Will. And so I guess the next build off of that. So I think every business owner needs, what I've heard today is every business owner needs to think about their content strategy, who their audience is, determine how much energy to put into various platforms, what type of content will do best with those particular clients of that business. How does Twitter fit into this for businesses? Like, I use it more for social listening, like what's actually happening in the markets, but which businesses do you see using Twitter well for business, or is it mainly just a listening platform?
I don't know if David has a comment here. Oh, okay, I'm not muted. I don't think businesses have to be on Twitter. Maybe that's controversial to say, but it really depends on the business. I think that there are members of your audience or your customer base that are obviously on Twitter. And there used to be a thing which was that, like, well, you need to be on social media because everyone's there, and like the conversation is going to be happening without you. So you better be on there. But even within the tech industry and just a lot of the small business I know in Vancouver, like, they're not all on Twitter, and it has had no impact on their business, right? So in Vancouver, my favorite fried chicken place is Down Low. Fried chicken on Commercial. I don't know if anyone's been there, but it's the best in Vancouver. And like, they like don't use Twitter. You know why? Because like they don't need to. Like, there's a lineup around the street every time I go there, and their Instagram account just posts photos of fried chicken every day, and they've got like 50,000 followers. So so why would they be on Twitter tweeting stuff, right? With probably being attacked by like Peter or something, right? So like, you see. You got to think about what makes sense for you. So I don't think everyone needs to be on Twitter. Again, obviously our organization is for a news organization, but I think it really depends on the small business.
Yeah, totally agree. And it makes a ton of sense, William, that your organization would be on Twitter, because that's where a lot of these conversations are happening, right? In insurance, there's not a lot of insurance conversations happening on Twitter. I mean there are, but if we were to go in and actually invest time and resources into that means less or fewer resources invested into LinkedIn, right? So what's the cost benefit analysis? What's the really value that we're bringing? It's just not the same. We haven't validated it as we have an account, but we rarely post. Conventions and stuff, it's kind of fun to get involved in whatever's going on in that convention. But an interesting example, Download Chicken is a great example, but Lush recently announced, right? They're cutting all of their social media, right? Interesting sort of PR move, maybe. And we'll see how long it kind of lasts. But do you have to be on social media at all? It's a question you should ask yourself, right? Don't take it for granted. But then it's like, if you are going to get involved, what's the most effective use of your time? Twitter's no different than TikTok, Clubhouse, any of the other things. Where are you gonna focus?
And you're both journalists, so the fact that you started out by writing content that was well received and that you're able to grow a following that way, I guess at the end of the day, it comes down to knowing what your strengths are as a business owner and who you have as resources on your team to grow your business. If someone who joined your team happened to be really good at TikTok and wanted to give it a go, sure, but are you going to divert focus from the areas that you are already doing well? Not necessarily. So I guess the question I have for you guys about growing the team is, if you are doing well in a particular piece of content marketing, do you just focus on that, or how do you explore other platforms when you're growing, or other types of content production?
Yeah, I think you have to put it through a bit of a decision-making framework, right? And I mean, all of the things that we've talked about today, they could go through a bit of a framework of, is this going to address our audience? Are we going to tap into a new audience that we're not currently getting in front of? Is the type of content that we're going to create different, or do we have to create new type of content? Can we leverage our existing content on this platform? These are all questions that you should really seriously ask yourself before you sort of charge down a path. What are you already good at is a really, really important. Like, I mean, I hate to go back to sort of business school, but doing a SWOT analysis of your content marketing is not a bad idea, right? And really taking an honest look at what are we good at, what are our strengths, and how do we leverage that most effectively. I think that's where you start when you investigate any new thing, because this comes at me all the time, right? Like, should we be on X? Should we be on Y? Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we taking this approach? It's like, because we'd have to stop doing something else, or we have to invest more in it. And is it worth it? What's the return? What do we expect? I'm not opposed to trying new things, right? I'm not opposed to testing a hypothesis and seeing if it plays out. But you have to be then completely willing to drop it if it's not working. Don't keep doing something for the sake of doing something. That's a hard-learned lesson. But just saying, no, we're not doing it anymore, that's paid off really well for us. We've charged down a lot of sort of roads in terms of content creation or trying new things, even in our business more generally, where it takes sometimes a little bit of courage to say, let's just stop. This isn't working. Swallow your ego, move on.
Yeah, I don't have like that much to say. I'd say I agree with most of like pretty much everything David said. But while he was talking, it made me think of a video I watched. And Brandon, maybe write this down. I don't know if you're sending resources out, or I can tweet it later. But Coca-Cola used to have this like marketing strategy that they called liquid and linked. Obviously, everyone here is not Coke and doesn't have the resources as Coke, but it was interesting because they basically said 70% of what we'll do is like what we know will succeed. And then there was 20% that was like the content innovation, like 20% of what they would do was like a slight iteration of what they knew would work in terms of marketing. And then there was like a 10% that was like the pie in the sky, like this could totally fail, sort of marketing stuff. Yeah, I think it's a YouTube video you can watch called Liquid and Linked. I think if you Google that, you'll find it, but it's just an interesting way to think about it. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, this recording will be sent out afterwards, and I'll try to find that video to include in the follow-up. So we're coming to the top of the hour, so I just want to ask both of you this question. Perhaps we'll start with David. What do you see as big opportunities for small business owners in 2022 when it comes to content? And if there's any sort of takeaway you'd like them to take from today.
That's a big question. I mean, I'll take it back to the beginning is really understand your audience. I think a lot of people make the mistake of assuming they understand the audience, but go through your buying process, buy from yourself and find out what the friction points are. Don't assume anything. And then really that should give you a great foundation from which to build up your content strategy, whether that's video, written content, how you're leveraging it, how you're distributing it. That'll all tie back to that, right? I think that's the most important takeaway. You probably already have an email list. You probably already have a bit of a social media following. Leverage it. Don't go out and try to do something that you haven't tried before as a core strategy. I love that analogy, William, or like that story of 70%. That's what we're going to really focus on. But of course, the other 30%, there you can try some crazy things. Sometimes you might be surprised by that, but really figure out what your strengths are, and focus in on that, and don't get distracted. I've said it a dozen times already today, but I'm just saying it again.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. Like there have definitely been some themes today, which is like what David just said, consider your strengths and like the resources that you have at your disposal, right? And sort of double down there. The other thing I would say, just again, coming like now I'm a writer, right? So it's like, how do you make people care, right? And I think that comes down to what David's talked about, which is like really knowing your audience, right? So, the value in the content you're creating is going to be, hyper relevant for them. So that's what I would say that small business owners really need to think about. And then just really, really quickly, like, actually, I'm not going to get into it. I could go on like another 15-minute thing, but Brandon, we'll just have to do this again. So I want to leave it at that, like knowing your audience and making sure that you're creating value for them.
That's awesome. No, thank you both for joining us today. I'm just going to quickly share up the contact information for both David as well as myself. If anyone has further questions for them, if you've got any great story tips for William, I'm sure he would certainly appreciate it. But for all of us, all of the content marketers and the business owners who joined today, I hope you got some value from the session. And then please share your feedback, as we're looking to potentially do more sessions like this in the new year. But William, David, thank you both for joining us today. Definitely took some knowledge from both of you that I'm going to apply to my businesses, and I'm sure the folks in the call will as well.
Thanks,
Really
Brandon.
appreciate it, Brandon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.